Have you noticed that asking for help is often much harder than you think? As modern men, we want to look strong and fix everything on our own. But the real question is not asking for help brave, or is asking for help? According to the Stoics, living a virtuous life means knowing your limits and accepting them. That's exactly where asking for help becomes a sign of courage. Yes, it might sound paradoxical. Stoicism often tells us to be self-sufficient, but we usually misunderstand it. Being self-sufficient doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means knowing when to get support. Think about Epictetus. He started life as a slave and battled life's hardships. Even he didn't shy away from getting help. He leaned on friends and the people around him to learn. He accepted that being strong also meant admitting he wasn't alone. The same is true in modern life. At work, in relationships, even with our mental health, we may need help. So how do you get help the right way? Opening up to the wrong person can make things more complicated. That's why choosing the right person is critical. In the next sections, with examples from Seneca's life, we'll see why getting help from the right person matters. Remember, through this video, each section will move like a step. Step 1 is courage. Step 2 is choosing the right person. Step 3 is being clear about what you need. Step 4 is putting pride aside, and Step 5 is managing the help you receive responsibly. Now, as you begin this journey, ask yourself, can you remember a time you needed help? What did you do in that moment? What did you notice? By combining the answers to those questions with the lessons we'll take from the Stoics, we'll see step by step that asking for help in modern life is actually a virtue. Epictetus's life is a powerful example of how much courage it actually takes to ask for help. He was born into slavery, and in the daily life of a Roman slave, freedom was almost impossible. But he refused to live as just another slave. People often assumed that slaves couldn't achieve anything on their own. But Epictetus didn't think that way. One day, the master of the house where he worked noticed his potential and gave him a chance to get an education. Epictetus seized that chance. But here's the key point. To get an education, he had to ask for help. Back then, it was almost unheard of for a slave to secure such an opportunity on their own. Epictetus could have ignored it, but instead he showed courage and directly asked his master, openly saying he wanted to learn. He did this because he knew his own limits. Without knowledge and education, he couldn't improve his life. Asking his master for help meant both risking rejection and stepping into dangerous social territory. He understood that, but he still gathered his courage and clearly voiced his request to the very person who had crippled him as a child for mere amusement. Could you ask for help from someone who had hurt, broken, or wounded you? At first, his master hesitated because it was unusual for a slave to be so bold. But Epictetus stayed calm and steady, showing that his only goal was to learn and grow. And what happened as a result? He gained his master's trust and began his education. That decision not only gave him knowledge, but also laid the groundwork for the philosophy he would later teach. Asking for help was a risk, and Epictetus accepted that risk with courage. His experience shows that asking for help isn't weakness, it's an act of virtue and bravery. If Epictetus hadn't accepted his limits and asked for education, he would have lost the chance to learn and share Stoic philosophy. The same applies today. When done the right way and with the right person, asking for help makes you stronger and opens the door to new opportunities. That's why in the next section we'll look at why it's so important to choose the right person to ask for help. Because as Epictetus' story shows, asking alone isn't enough. It has to come from a source that's trustworthy and right. Seneca's life makes it crystal clear how important it is to choose the right person when you're asking for help. He was appointed as an advisor to the Roman Emperor Nero, a role that was incredibly delicate. Nero was young and inexperienced, constantly making mistakes, and most of the people around him were looking out for their own interests. Seneca's job wasn't just to give advice, it was to steer Nero in the right direction. Here's what Seneca did. First, he figured out who he could trust and who could give him reliable information. The palace was full of people, but most were manipulating situations for their own gain. Seneca understood the value of help, so he built connections with trustworthy individuals who could guide him. For example, his friend Burrus, who had both military and administrative experience, was a dependable source of support for Seneca's decisions. With Nero so prone to making bad choices, every piece of advice Seneca gave carried risk. Getting help from the wrong source could have endangered not only Seneca himself, but all of Rome. He recognized this and carefully selected who he'd turn to. Every recommendation he made to Nero was backed by information from people he knew were competent and reliable. And what happened because of this? For one, his guidance became more effective. Some of Nero's decisions were steered in a better direction thanks to Seneca and his trusted advisors. Secondly, Seneca protected his own position and built a kind of shield against manipulation. The same principle applies today. Asking the wrong person for help can make things messier, while choosing the right person strengthens the whole process. Seneca identified the right people, leaned on their guidance, and passed that well-informed advice on to Nero. This showed not only his wisdom, but also his strategic thinking. Asking for help isn't just about making a request, it's about drawing from the right sources. This example is just as relevant in modern life. Whether it's work, relationships, or personal growth, if we don't choose carefully who we turn to, we risk being misled. Seneca's strategy shows us that asking for help is only half the story. Who you get it from is a decisive factor. That's why in the next section we'll look at the importance of first knowing exactly what you need. Because finding the right person begins with understanding your own needs. Marcus Aurelius's life offers a striking example of clarity and the ability to decide from within. During the Marcomannic Wars, the Roman army was in a critical state. The northern borders were under attack, and at the same time internal politics were in chaos. Generals were proposing different strategies, advisors were pushing their own ideas. In the middle of this storm, Marcus had to be clear within himself before deciding which course of action was right. True to Stoic philosophy, Marcus first assessed the situation objectively. Knowing his own limits and strengths and understanding where he could rely on his advisors was his priority. He cleared away the uncertainties in his mind and identified which information and strategies deserved his focus. This approach helped him make effective decisions not just on the battlefield but also in governing the empire. His clarity allowed him to evaluate his advisors' suggestions more wisely and to choose which advice to act on. With that clarity, Marcus was able to set his priorities: the safety of his soldiers, the protection of the Roman people, and the implementation of a long-term strategy. He planned every step around those priorities and kept his communication with his advisors transparent. As a result, the army's morale stayed strong, strategic advantages were gained, and political balance was maintained. Even in chaos, Marcus's mindset gave him the foundation to act rightly and virtuously. The lesson for modern life is obvious. In the middle of life's chaos, at work, in relationships, or in personal projects, before you ask for help, you need to be clear about what you actually need. Clarity makes help more effective and prevents misdirection. If your own mind is foggy, the advice you receive will feel confusing. If you're clear, the help you get becomes both effective and efficient. As Marcus Aurelius's example shows, clarity is not just mental preparation, it's a strategic tool. By defining his priorities and needs before weighing his advisor's proposals, he was able to lead successfully. The same applies today. When you're clear within yourself, you can get the best possible support from the people you turn to. In the next section, we'll focus on putting pride aside and asking for help with courage. Clarity alone isn't enough. The right mindset and managing your pride are essential to receiving help effectively. During the American Revolution, George Washington and his troops entered one of their hardest seasons. The winter of 1777 at Valley Forge went down in history. The soldiers were exhausted, hungry, and their morale was shattered. The army's situation was critical, and many officers were pushing their own methods, sometimes even questioning Washington's authority. Under normal circumstances, as a proud leader, Washington could have simply imposed his own strategy, but that would have crushed the army's spirit even more. Instead, Washington took a stoic approach. He set his pride aside and asked for help. He spoke openly with his officers and logistics leaders, pinpointing which areas of the army needed support and what resources were required to boost the soldiers' motivation. Putting his pride aside didn't just give him the courage to seek support, it also allowed him to make better decisions and use the army's resources more effectively. This approach helped Washington regain his soldiers' trust. Asking for help and consulting with others wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a display of wisdom and strategic thinking. By clarifying each officer's duties and responsibilities, he strengthened the Army's organization. By personally engaging with the troops, he lifted their morale and fostered a sense of solidarity. As a result, the Army's spirit rose, and despite the brutal winter conditions, the forces recovered. These actions later made it possible for the American Army to gain a strategic edge as the war went on. The lesson for modern life is clear. Pride often stops us from asking for help. At work, on projects, or in our personal lives, thinking I can handle this alone can make things harder. Washington's example shows that setting pride aside and getting the right help from the right people is a critical step in using resources effectively. Asking for help is a sign of courage and wisdom. Managing your pride is a key to success. This episode also highlights the link between leadership and responsibility. If Washington hadn't set aside his ego and pride, he wouldn't have been able to keep his army from falling apart. Asking for help and seeking counsel strengthened his leadership and helped secure success at critical moments of the American Revolution. In the next section, we'll look at how to manage the help you receive responsibly and how that affects your personal growth. Because asking for help matters, but using it properly and doing your part is what brings out true virtue. Cato the Younger was known as a principled and determined statesman in the final years of the Roman Republic. Throughout his life, he faced pressure, intrigue, and danger. Yet he stayed firmly committed to Stoic philosophy. Let me tell you about a time during the power struggle between Pompey and Caesar when Cato himself sought counsel. Rome was sliding deeper into political crisis, and many senators were manipulating events for their own gain. Cato, however, carefully weighed the advice he received and acted only on ideas he believed were sound. He understood the value of asking for guidance, but to him, the real virtue lay in managing that guidance responsibly. He didn't just accept advice, he analyzed every suggestion, assessed the risks, and took full responsibility for the outcomes of whatever he put into action. This approach allowed him not only to protect his own political stance, but also to preserve the republic's stability, at least temporarily. The responsibilities he took on made his leadership active and principled, not merely advisory. We see the same pattern in modern life. People often forget to own the responsibility that comes with receiving help, or they fail to use the support they're given effectively. Cato's example shows that it's not enough just to accept help. You have to apply it and take ownership of the results. In business projects or personal growth, managing the help you receive responsibly is a critical step towards success. Cato's strategy also highlights the importance of inner discipline in the face of outside pressure. Amid political intrigue and threats, his ability to evaluate help correctly and act on it responsibly strengthened both his leadership and his integrity. Seeking help matters, but using it wisely and owning its consequences matters even more. Cato the Younger's example proves that the true value of help emerges only when it's handled with responsibility. Asking for support takes courage and good judgment, but using that support strategically and responsibly is what brings real virtue and success. For us too, the path is clear. Be clear about what you need, choose the right person, set aside pride, and manage the help you receive with responsibility. These 4 steps build both strength and wisdom. Today we look together at how asking for help can be handled from a Stoic perspective in modern life. In each section we saw examples from the lives of different figures: Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, George Washington, and Cato the Younger. Each of them showed us that asking for help is not just an act, but also requires the right mental attitude, clarity, managing pride, and a sense of responsibility. First of all, asking for help is an act of courage. As Epictetus taught, we need to see it not as weakness, but as wisdom. Knowing your own limits amid life's chaos and identifying what you need forms the foundation for getting the right help. Then, as we learned from Seneca, choosing the right person to receive help from is critical. A wrong guide or advice is not only a waste of time, but can sometimes cause harm. That's why it's necessary to make a choice based on both trust and knowledge. Marcus Aurelius showed us the importance of clarity. Even in mixed and chaotic situations, clearing our minds and determining our priorities makes decision-making easier and increases the effectiveness of the help. Washington reminded us how much pride can be an obstacle. Bravely asking for help, putting pride aside, is an indispensable part of achieving success. Finally, Cato the Younger showed that the value of help only emerges when it is managed with responsibility. Applying the support we receive correctly and taking responsibility for the results reveals true virtue. When adapted to our modern lives, these 4 steps give us a roadmap. First, be clear, then get help from the right person. Control your pride, and manage the help you receive with responsibility. These seemingly simple steps make a big difference in business life, relationships, and personal development. Remember, asking for help is a virtue. Doing it the right way is wisdom. Always keep in mind that when a person knows their limits, succeeds in getting support and managing it properly, they become both strong and virtuous. This is one of the most important lessons of Stoic philosophy in modern life. Thank you for watching.